Our story today is about a German family living in the province of Bavaria. This family was investigated for the crime that befell them for a period that no one can ever imagine, as the family murder was investigated for 85 years. This may seem strange to some, and there are those who did not believe that this case was investigated for that long. The investigation began in 1922 AD and ended in 2007 AD. The crime occurred specifically in March, specifically on the 31st. The family that was subjected to this tragedy is the Gruber family, including the maid who was working in the house. The number of family members was 5, and they were all killed, along with the maid. 6 months before the crime, it all started. There was a maid working in the family home. This maid was accustomed to hearing strange noises around the house. She would hear the sound of knocking on the windows of the house, and at other times she would hear whispering sounds in the hallways, and other sounds that made. He heard her and felt very afraid. The maid did not hesitate to tell the family members what she heard, but the family members did not believe the maid and told her that all of this was nothing but preparations. The maid was sure that she heard those voices, and for this reason she could no longer continue working and decided to leave work, and this is what happened. Actually, the situation remained as it was until one day before the date of the crime, when the family decided to bring in a new maid. On the same day that the new maid came, the family began to hear the same voices that the previous maid had been telling them about. Not only that, but the family noticed some strange things, and the suspiciousness that began to occur in the house without knowing the reason for the occurrence of such things. For example, the father found on the floor a newspaper that he or any of the family members had not purchased before, in addition to the disappearance of the keys to the storeroom that contains the equipment that the family members use on an ongoing basis. All of these things may be normal, but one day something suspicious happened. The weather was very cold and the snow was falling heavily. One of the family members noticed strange traces on the snow. These traces were coming from the forest and reaching the house, not only to the house, but specifically inside the house. Not only is this terrifying, but the terrifying thing is that these traces are traces of a creature or a person who entered the house but did not come out. The traces show that that thing is still inside the house. Horror began to creep into the heart of the family, and they remembered well the words of the former maid. The father, who was Andreas, was called to his neighbor and told him what had happened, and even told him about the previous maid's conversation. The neighbor told him that he had to arm himself in anticipation of any emergency, but Andreas refused to do so. On the specific day, which was the day all the family members were killed, the crime occurred. There was already a killer who had infiltrated the house. On that day, the killer took the family members one by one to the barn to kill them. 4 members of the family were killed and placed in the barn. As for the 5th individual, she was a little girl. The killer killed her and the new maid in the house. The strange thing is that the killer did not kill the family and escape, but rather the killer remained in the house for several days after committing the murder. The crime was not discovered until 5 days after it was committed. The reason is that no one noticed anything suspicious around the house. There was smoke coming out of the heater, and the barn was full of food intended for the animals, and everything seemed normal. All of this was the reason for the crime not being discovered. On the 5th day of the crime, there was a worker who had agreed with the family members to come to repair one of the agricultural machines. Indeed, that worker came forward and began. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. The worker decided to repair the machine because it was outside the house. After the worker finished repairing the machine, he noticed something suspicious, which was the presence of a dog tied to the door of the house. This dog was not there. Here the worker made sure that the family was inside the house. The worker did not have much time, so he decided to go to the family's neighbor, Lawrence. The worker told Lawrence what happened. Lawrence decided to go check on the family, especially since he had not seen any of them for nearly 5 days. Lawrence arrived at the house but did not find anything inside. He went to the barn and found the family members killed. Lawrence immediately told the police, which came and began its investigation. Perhaps you did not believe that the first suspect was Lawrence himself, because he is the closest to the family. Not only that, but also because Lawrence wanted to marry the family's daughter, but Father Andreas refused to do so. The investigation that proved Lawrence's innocence continued for a long time, but in the end, nothing was achieved and the case ended in 2007.